Hey guys, thanks again for checking out another one of my battle reports. Sorry that this one again was a bit of a short game. I've been finding that a lot of the games, not only that I'm playing for 8th edition, but that I've been spectating for 8th edition, both online and in my local stores, things like that, tend to be going very decisively. I think that's just a normal thing in the early days of a new game, new edition. So many things have changed for the people that are used to 7th edition that I think someone like myself coming into the game with fresh eyes, having a background with Age of Sigmar, which is so similar to how 40k now works, that you're just seeing a lot of people feeling out lists, not sure exactly what to take, not always having the right tools for everything. So sometimes the games can be a little bit of a blowout, especially when you have an army that's more competitively focused, like mine is. Not to say that the orc build I have is, complete tournament dominator or anything like that, but I'm certainly testing it with competitiveness in mind. Whereas that's maybe not always what I'm playing into. I couldn't say for sure, but it basically it is what it is in terms of the games ending quickly sometimes, at least from my observations. So yeah, this one was over a little bit quickly. I certainly think it was much more competitive than my last game. If you check that one out, where I played a 2,000 point match against Necrons, and that one was just completely one-sided. I barely was even losing any models. In this game, I actually did lose quite a few models. I lost an entire unit. A couple of my other units were barely hanging on with like 10 guys or less than 10 guys. So quite close to losing, bigger portions of my army. And indeed, if we kept playing, I would have lost even more. Like I would have lost all my weird boys except for one, probably. Probably would have lost another unit of boys or two from the Daka Scourge unit. So we just decided to call it early because it was just so obvious what was going to happen. There, like I said, there was no way that Dan could actually contest the objectives with the amount of numbers that I had, and then the amount of offense I was almost certain to do on my turn 3 was really going to put the nail in the coffin in terms of just leaving the Flyers alive. And at that point, there's just no coming back because, the Flyers don't do enough damage to infantry. They are good against infantry, but they don't do enough damage to the infantry I have left, especially when I start turtling up with the custom force fields onto the objectives. And then the game will be kind of just pointless from there. And then with random game length, he can't even land one of the flyers near an objective because if the game keeps going, then he has to move off of it next turn because he has a mandatory 20-inch movement. So it's a little bit of a gamble whether that will even work or not. So we just decided to call it there. But there's a lot of lessons to be learned in this game, I think. The biggest takeaway I have is continuing to refine my deployment. I did do a much better job this time of making sure that my war bosses and my big mechs were up front with my army so that they could, some poor advance rolls or something like that isn't necessarily going to keep the big mechs out, and then the war bosses can be more towards the front lines to kind of zoom out and do their thing if they need to. But I definitely am going to experiment with deploying in a 7x4 fashion. So what that basically is, if you look at my trays, is they hold 2 rows of 10 guys. So I can have a row of 10, and then a row of 10 behind it, so 4 rows of 5 basically, and then I can have another tray that's more eye-shaped, so it'll be a row of 7, a row of 7, a row of 7, a row of 7, and then like a row of 2. So it's like that's all 30 guys, and then what that does is it takes up less of a footprint on the table, and that makes it much easier to keep my 9-inch custom force field bubble on 2 units, so I can deploy the big mech between 2 blocks of guys, and then I can also have a block of guys behind the big mech to get them in the bubble as well, and then they can spread out a little bit more, so I can do just like a 10x2 formation. So just put the trays all next to each other, and then that way everybody has the custom force field at least on the first turn, which is useful for when you're playing against gun lions or army with a lot of speed like Dark Eldar and Eldar, things like that. And then it's not too difficult of a formation to maintain on turn 1 either while you're moving, barring any really weird advancing rolls. So I think that's definitely what I'll try to do in the future. And then I also need to make sure I'm leaving enough of a gap for my war boss so that they can do heroic intervention if my units get charged. heroic intervention with the war boss is really good because you can only attack what you charged on the turn that you charged. So if for example, the Hellions in this game charged my red orc unit, and I had a war boss in position to heroic intervention, he can get in there. The Hellions can't hit him because of the game rules, but he gets to hit them, and that helps give me some punching power, especially against more elite units. Like the Hellions are not the best example because they're toughness 3 and I think have like a 4 or 5 plus save. They're actually really papery. But if it was like a space marine assault marine unit or something like that, that's a little bit more elite, and I want that multiple damage in there, or that AP in there, something like that, then I can get it. So again, I'm getting better with the deployment as I'm playing, and I think with a couple more games under my belt with this list, I'll have a really good formation that I can kind of just rely on every game. So that was my big takeaway for that. Another big takeaway I had for the game was that the weird boys are, I'm still struggling to use them effectively. In this game, I think I picked a poor target to get them out of the trucks for. Dan dropped a 5-man unit of Scourges to try to shoot my truck to death, which is good because that's my only vehicle, and they had Dark Lances, so that's their ideal target. But their Scourges are very papery. Again, they're like a 4 plus save, toughness 3, so I could have just moved one of my boys' units, advanced it to charge them, taken the Overwatch, and then just sat in my truck and still had my anti-flyer unit available for when I needed them. But as it was, I got them out, killed a unit that they really didn't need to kill, took some wounds from perils as well because I had too many guys around still, and then because Dan played his reserves very well, only dropping one unit and then leaving the other two back for turn 2 to kind of see where I was going, see where he needed reinforcements, stuff like that. He was able to drop the other unit of blaster scourges to counteract the weird boys, and then also fly over there with his jets. So both of those units are very effective character hunters because the jets are super fast and they can close the gap to make sure that they're closest to the character to shoot it, and then the scourges can kind of just drop wherever you need in order to do the same thing. So if I'd stayed in my truck, I probably would have been pretty safe. I was still under the custom force field. The custom force field aura, so I have a 5 plus invone. The truck has 10 wounds. It has a 6 plus save, turning multiple damage into 1 damage. It's reasonably likely that I would have been able to live, especially with the position that I had it nestled very tightly into a building, so that it was going to be very hard for the flyers to actually get line of sight to it with more than 1 or 2, and that's exactly what happened. So if I just stayed in there, or even moved the truck a little bit and then gotten the weird boys out and kept them behind the truck so that nothing could see them no matter what, because their line of sight would have been blocked behind the building, and then the trucks, they'd be sandwiched between the two, and the truck would be the closest thing to shoot at, then that would have kept them really safe, and I could have been threatening them for kind of the later parts of the game, so maybe Dan wouldn't have been able to fly so close to me, or something like that, and I think that would have been a better move. I think the unit's really good still. It's never been useless or like failed me. I mean, they did blow up a jet this game, which is exactly what I take them to do: kill flyers, kill stuff like a land raider, things like that my army just has a problem dealing with. But I still need to use them more as a reserve piece. Like, oh, I have this threatening thing, and I'm just not using it, not using it, not using it, and it's still, my opponent still has to think about that I have this, all these smites just waiting for him, waiting to get him, and that's really valuable because now he's trying to deal with the orcs. He's trying to keep the smites in mind, as I'm wearing down his army, and it's more obvious that the smites are going to be more powerful. So that's how I need to play them in the future, and I think that's really where the smite spam package excels, not as the primary offense of your army or something that's relied upon to take out units very quickly, but as a very dangerous counterpunch boogeyman that your opponent always has to keep in mind. So I'm going to try to keep that in mind myself in the future. Dan's army is pretty good. We talked about the list after the game. I think the Hellions are really bad. I don't know how many points they are off the top of my head because they took GW send a cease and desist to the army builder application that I use, which is really annoying, but life goes on. But they are 1 wound apiece, toughness 3 with a bad save. They don't shoot particularly well, and they fight decently. They have a decent strength, especially with the combat drugs. I believe they're strength 5, AP -1 with their glaives. So they're pretty good at killing mediocre armor units, and they could put out a lot of attacks, but there's just not that many of those kind of units in the game. Most things are pretty elite, so something more like Marines. They're probably pretty decent at killing Marines, but they're also really easily shot by Marines. And then they're not good at killing chaff like my Orks because they just don't put out the amount of attacks that they need to. I mean, they flew in, and between their shooting and some other shooting, and then their close combat attacks, they were able to wipe out about half or a little bit more than half of my red orcs. But there was some hot rolling in there for their hits and things like that. And overall, I just really wasn't impressed with them. On the other side, I was really impressed with the bikes. The bikes have toughness 4, which is very important. Toughness 4 is fantastic in 8th edition. They have 2 wounds, very good. They could put out a great amount of attacks with the combat drugs. Dan gave them, they had 3 attacks apiece. That's pretty good for dealing with chaff. That's exactly what you want to have, is high volume of, mediocre attacks. And then they're just really fast, so they're good at getting around the board. They have decent guns. I don't think I like the Grav Talons all that much. I mean, Mortal Wounds are very good, and again, it's good if you charge them into a more elite thing, but I would probably use them as like full-on, screen killers and stuff like that because they're so fast. It's really easy to assault with them, and to just kind of equip them that way. I really like the Dark Eldar Flyers. I think they're fantastic. They have good guns. The fact that they have mixed guns is actually really strong because it prevents them from being pigeonholed. So their Dark Lances have great range. Wherever you put them, they're probably going to be able to shoot a vehicle or a monster or something like that with the Dark Lances. And then you can get them closer for their missiles and their splinter rifles and all that other kind of stuff. To get rapid fire and things like that. So with their great speed, they're -1 to hit. They have a 5+ invone, which is fantastic because it's really tilting if you shoot an anti-vehicle gun at them, and then they make a couple of those 5+s. I've seen that several times in other battle reports, and it just looks completely miserable. So they're fantastic for their points, and I expect to see a lot of those as a staple in the Dark Eldar army. I think Kabalites are good too. I don't love having just one unit of them. They felt a little out of place in this list. I don't know what purpose they serve. They aren't good in assault particularly. They had just like a splinter cannon, so it feels like they're kind of just a little gunboat to go around, maybe hold an objective with because they have some numbers, and then they can do some shooting. Threes to hit and always a 4 to wound against infantry is fine, but it's not anything to write home about. And then because they have an Archon with them, they want to get close because the Archon wants to fight stuff, but the Kabalites don't. And then the Raider kind of is just a Darklands, transport, so it wants to do whatever the unit wants to do, but the unit's conflicted. So I don't know if I love that. I might suggest like some witches or something that kind of does what the Archon wants to do, or drop the Archon and just make them, kind of an anti-vehicle choice with the Dark Lance and then a blaster and a Dark Lance or something like that. There's a few ways you can go with it, but that unit felt a little conflicted to me. And then I was pretty unimpressed with the Kronos. I like the Kronos plus Talos package. I think it's 1 Kronos, 2 Talos that a couple of other people have been talking about online, because the Kronos can heal the Talos, I believe, and then its aura gives them some buffs, and they do a little bit more actual combat work than the Kronos does. So that's a little bit better of a package there. I think they're really good, especially if you have a homunculi with them, because I believe he gives them like an extra toughness or something. I don't remember off the top of my head, sorry, but that can be a really nice little durable package, which is something that Dark Eldar struggle with. Really popular right now is a lot of flyers, a lot of gunboats, a lot of venoms with blaster squads inside, things like that. But that army is really papery, and it has problems dealing with infantry armies because you don't have that many splinter rifles. You have a lot of dark lances. You have some missiles and stuff like that, but it's really easy to focus the things down that deal with infantry. So I think that having something that can actually get into combat and get some work done, or hold up a unit and start grinding them down. Things like that is actually important and valuable for a Dark Eldar list. So maybe keep an eye on that. I was really impressed with the Scourges. Scourges are super awesome. I've been playing Warhammer for 13 years on and off, and Dark Eldar Scourges have pretty much always been a joke when I've been playing, and I've been playing since 3rd edition. And they are fantastic now. Like I said in the battle report, I read the deep strike rule as you do not get -1 to hit with heavy weapons. Please correct me on that if I'm wrong, but the way I read it, it does not say that you move or anything. It just says that you set them up. Setup does not count as a move, so I don't think they get -1 to hit. But with that, them having, you could take a 5-man unit with the Dark Lances. I don't like the blasters so much, just because they're really suicide squaddy. Like, they come down, they shoot a vehicle, and then it's difficult for them to kind of redeploy, even though they're fast. But there's some value to it. But the DACA Scourge squad is really good. I mean, being able to drop that, so many shots that wound on 4s anywhere you need to, and then they can redeploy effectively because of their speed and their range, is very potent. I would expect to see more of that in Dark Eldar lists. I think that was a great inclusion by Dan, and that was certainly the most scary unit that he had against me. If I was running, no weird boys or something like that, where I couldn't actively redeploy to counter them, I would have a really tough problem dealing with them, because they're, like I said, they're so fast and they have good range, so they can just kite you forever. And they're good late game once you've eliminated some, like mid to late game, once you've eliminated some threats to them, because they're still very vulnerable. But if you can utilize line of sight terrain and then maybe save them until turn 2 or turn 3, when the game's been joined a little bit more, then I think they can really help clean up a lot of things past that. I probably wouldn't run them with as heavy a deep strike army, because you want more of your list up front to be able to actually fight your opponent. But if you can, like I said, if you can save them for those mid to late game, then I really see them flourishing. So it was a good game. Like I said, I just Dan didn't have all the tools that he needed to deal with hordes. We talked about it afterwards. He thinks he went a little too heavy on anti-tank, anti-monster guns. He has a ton of dark lances, a ton of blasters, stuff like that. So probably going to pull some of that back and maybe invest in some close combat stuff. Invest in some more high volume shooting, so like some disintegrator cans, I believe he was talking about. I don't play Dark Eldar, so I don't know all their stuff down pat yet. I'm trying to learn the armies as I go, but it's a process. And then he was even talking about maybe using a second unit of the DACA Scourges. I think that's maybe a little bit too far. You're treading a little bit into not enough anti-vehicle there at that point, and putting too many eggs in, a toughness 3, like 4+ armor save basket. But I certainly think that, some more, maybe some more like shooty Cabalites, some more taking away some Dark Lances and just buying some other stuff. Like I said, that the Talos package would be cool, things like that. I could see the list getting a lot more powerful, and I would definitely cut the Hellions, because I was just really unimpressed with them. Like, maybe there's some combos that I'm missing with them, but they just seem way too papery. If they don't get a charge on turn 1, they're just going to die, and then whatever they charge into has to absolutely be worth at least what their points are, and they have to kill it. So, because otherwise it's just going to withdraw, and then they're going to get shot to death, because they're made out of complete paper. They have no resiliency at all. And then even if you charge them, they have no resiliency. So they're a super finesse piece, and I think that's. Again, I'm not sure what their points are, but judging by how elite Dan's army was and some of the things he had, like, I know Cabalites aren't very expensive, Archons not very expensive, Raiders aren't very expensive, the Jets are pretty moderately priced, so I'm guessing that they were a decent chunk, and I just don't see what they do that the army really requires. It's not like Eldar have ever had a problem, killing Marine equivalents or anything like that, so that seems to be their specialty, but I don't even feel that they do that very well. had a lot better of a time playing this mission than kill points. I think the ITC guys, if you're familiar with competitive 40k, they do a lot of the big tournament stuff for 40k. They're kind of the leading community voice, but I believe they are publishing their own missions, and I'm looking forward to those because I think the worst thing about 40k right now is the missions. The like I've said a few times, the ones in the rulebook. The ones where you don't score until the end of the game is really bad because then the mission doesn't really matter. In this case, we could have been playing kill points and I would have won. We could have been playing whoever kills the most of their opponent's army wins and I would have won. It was just that the objectives gave me a method to win, but I was so ahead it didn't matter. So the fact that you don't score until the end of the game makes the missions somewhat irrelevant unless you're playing a really back and forth punchy game like Marines on Marines or something like that, and then you have like a desperate scramble to get them at the end. And then I believe the Maelstrom missions, the one with the random cards, those are just not balanced. I mean, they're more for fun, but the cards are too random. Not every army can do all of them. Like, not every army can kill stuff in the shooting phase. Not every army can kill stuff in the assault phase. Not every army has psychers. Like, not even every army can bring psychers. So you end up with having to blow command points to get these new cards, which, sure, that's a little bit of a balancing thing, but now you're taxing people command points for playing an army like Tau or playing an army like mine where I don't really shoot stuff very much, things like that. And I think that's just not viable for a tournament setting. So I'm hoping that the community missions skew more towards Age of Sigmar for those of you familiar with that game, where they're a lot more simple, a lot more streamlined. You typically have like 3 or 4 objectives, but you score them as the game goes. And what that does is it forces you to design your list differently. So in Age of Sigmar, you typically don't see as many really elite alpha strikey lists. You do see them, they exist, but a lot of people will take more generalized lists, and you're also incentivized to take numbers because you control the objectives through models near them, just like 40k now for the most part. So you have to be able to put a reasonable amount of models on an objective and keep them there. Now in 40k that's a lot easier because almost everything in 40k has a gun of some sort, whereas in Age of Sigmar it's a fantasy style game, so very few things have guns. But it just changes the tactics of the game. You don't focus as much on killing your opponent, and you don't bring your list to do nothing but hit as hard as you can in the first couple turns of the game. You also have to think about, oh, I need some maneuverability. I have to be able to, get to different parts of the table to score these objectives. Otherwise, I'm going to fall too far behind. And then even if I, blow my opponent out of the water, I have too big of a scenario deficit. Now, another problem with 40k is that they have a bad rule in the core rulebook where if you table your opponent, you automatically win. That does not exist in Age of Sigmar. In fact, specifically, you can table your opponent and the game even keeps going. So if I table you on turn 3, we play the 5 turns or the 6 turns or whatever that the scenario has, and if I don't catch up on scenario by then, I lose. Even though I tabled you, you got that early scenario lead and you win. And I think that's fantastic. That's a very tactical way to play the game. It rewards good army building. It rewards good play with positioning and maneuverability. And it de-incentivizes bringing super alpha strikey lists because typically those lists do not do scenario very well. So in the 40k, that would be something like bringing 3 to 4 knights. Those would be terrible at objectives because you would only have 4 models or, a little bit more than that in your army, and you could never hold an objective, so you would have to shoot your opponent literally off the table completely, and by then they would have a monstrous objective lead, and you would just lose. And that's a good thing because playing against 4 knights is super boring. There's probably people out there that like to play 4 knights, but I would be hesitant to say there's very many people that like to play against, those kind of very elite spammy lists, and you're going to see those at tournaments in 40k because why wouldn't you? It's all about killing your opponent, and the objective is secondary. Whereas in other games like Age of Sigmar, objective is primary, and killing your opponent is secondary. And I think that's a better way to play the game. So, like I said, very hopeful that some of these ITC missions or other big voices in the community are going to push that a little bit more. And for those of us interested in tournaments like myself, we will see that become the norm. And then you're going to see a lot more diversity in army builds, a lot more deep strikers, a lot more transports, very fast things so that you can go around and get to these different parts of the table instead of, the infantry spam, 500 conscript list that maybe can't get across the table as fast as it needs to start scoring some of these objectives, and gets really weak when it starts spreading out because now it has to, or like I said, the knight list, just things like that. A lot of these lists that people are worried about in the early days of 8th edition would not be viable if you played Age of Sigmar style missions where you had to score as the game goes. And I think that would lead to a much more balanced and just interesting game. So yep, let's see how that goes for the remainder of the edition. I'm hopeful. I haven't had any bad indications yet, but as always, we'll see how things go. So thanks a lot, guys, for listening to me ramble. Those are my post-game thoughts. I have another game scheduled for tomorrow, I believe, against Chaos. I have a couple things going on, so we'll see if I can make that game. But as always, I try to get a couple, 3 games in a week. Very easy right now because 8th edition is so new, and I will definitely be bringing you more battle reports in the future. So thanks again for watching, and see you next time.